Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar fan commentary track. This one's going to be for Book 2 Earth, Episode 5, Avatar Day. In the comments, let me know what other episodes from Avatar and Korra you would like to see me do as one of these commentary track videos. But if you want to set up your version of the episode to sync up with this commentary track, obviously have it ready to go, have it ready with Avatar Day ready to start. And when I finish up this introduction bit of the video in just a minute, there will be about a 10-second pause with no audio, and then when I start speaking again after that pause, that's when I'm going to hit play, that's when you should hit play, and we should be synced up after that point. So, bringing the introduction to an end, again, after I come back speaking, after the 10-second pause, the second you hear me start to speak, you press play, and we should be synced up. Okay, so here we are with 205, Avatar Day. I really do enjoy this episode. There's a nice blend of there being some pretty good humor in this, plus a pretty important sort of serious plot. It's another example of one of these kind of Book 2 episodes where they make sure to make up for what is otherwise a more comedy-focused episode by including a nice bit of world building. And so in this case, it is learning more about Avatar Kyoshi, including a very memorable kind of piece of history from her past. I actually have this episode rated, I think it's around number 44 on the list, so it seems like it's very far down, but you have to keep in mind that I rate 52 of the 61 episodes as being very highly rated, so there's only about 9 or so episodes towards the bottom of the list that I sort of put in a separate category than the other ones, so this is still within the good episodes. It just happens to be somewhat low down, and I put most of that down to the fact that I think they take the comedy in this episode a little bit too far, that it sort of extends a little bit into the more serious aspects of the episode. With regards to just Chin Village is a little over the top, that it's kind of hard to judge how sort of serious they're being about some of this stuff, and they're just odd and stuff like that. Like Mayor Tong is so dislikable in a weird kind of funny way. And it's fun, but it takes away some of the gravitas from the Kyoshi backstory because Chin is treated a little bit too much like a joke, despite basically accomplishing as much as Kuvira did. But we'll get to that when it happens. I like this opening section of just heavy action, the rough rhinos involved here. They're of course Jet's nemesis, and there's always a tragedy to the sense that he never gets to encounter them. The rough rhinos end up fighting like nearly everyone in the series, like except Jet, and that adds a kind of nice tragedy to it, that his big issue is with this group that are other characters, Iroh, Aang, and so on, end up encountering, sort of defeating relatively easily. They're not too much of a threat for most of our main characters, but they're Jet's main enemy. And there's an impact to that, of like Monge is actually this very serious character. It's just that he happened to come across mainly are very powerful characters. You wish there was almost an opportunity for that to happen, but it adds to the tragedy of Jet that he never gets that opportunity. So Sokka feels he's lost his identity here with the loss of the boomerang, and so this episode will see him take on a sort of different persona. We get Detective Sokka here, him trying to add extra gimmicks onto his character here with some new kind of pieces of equipment, basically. And here's where we find out about Avatar Day. It is funny to think that like we're right here, like in or around Yokoya / Kinshao village, I think is what they call it in the book. So from Rise of Kyoshi, which adds so much context to this episode now, it's so interesting being here, of like we have so much depth to what was kind of covered there. Not quite so much about this. This only happens more towards the end, where it's actually where the big confrontation between Kyoshi and Jianzhu happens, right at the end here in Kinshao village, where they talk about like the weird customs going all the way back into the past, that the people of the town are almost all exclusively from the clan of Chin, and the idea of these effigies that get burned has always been sort of part of the history here, that it's purposefully meant to be a very weird place that does things that nowhere else in the Earth Kingdom they do it. So the weirdness is explained through some nice world building in Rise of Kyoshi. But, you know, just like, oh wow, they don't like the Avatar, that's different. Aang thought he could just be out in the open there, but no. And then, of course, we do have some Zuko stuff on this side of the episode. This is still relatively early, with Zuko sort of figuring himself out. He's taken on the Blue Spirit mask again to sort of steal for himself and Iroh. And obviously, there's such symbolism to the Blue Spirit mask. We primarily learn about it through the Search comic of like the mask and what it represents. It's a mask from the play Love Amongst the Dragons. But specifically, the character is the character who's always defeated at the end. Is sort of has this sort of humiliating defeat at the end of that play, and so Zuko was always forced when they were young, when they sort of acted out this play, to play this character, and now it sort of represents him in his struggle to get his honor back and always feeling like the failure, compared to Azula, who always wins in a way. So that's the symbolism of it. Of it's him sort of, you know, almost like agreeing with the idea that he is this kind of character and taking on that role and doing those things in that way. It works, I think, really, really well. But here's Mayor Tong, such a hateable character. Their just us system and so on. And then, yeah, what did Avatar Kyoshi do in the past? Chin the Great. And this is obviously like Aang doesn't know about the exact details of all of his past lives. That was a nice joke. And it's like no Avatar would. That's Katara being very idealistic about the history of the Avatars. And it's actually one of the nicer things of like that we know the Avatars can make mistakes. Of like Roku ultimately, people were almost saying like you should have killed Sozin, but he chose not to. But there are other characters like a Kyoshi who have had to kill people during their time as Avatar. And yeah, here we go, Aang put in prison. And this ends up being a very fun plot because they take such a different approach with it. And the comedy is perfect on this side of the episode. Similarly, detective group Sokka and Katara, like Sherlock Sokka and, you know, Katara Watson, basically. It's pretty good. Airbending slice. The humor's pretty good. And so they have to find evidence basically for what happened. If he's going to go on trial, they need to know exactly what happened. So it's Kyoshi. Let's go to Kyoshi Island. This is great from Aang here, the reverse psychology. I thought you were a detective, Sokka. Okay. He's like, okay, well, you're not wrong. Missing seal jerky. I wonder was it Auntie Ashina's seal jerky? Old Man Jarko. Polar leopard. Which we actually get to see in North and South. So there's a few North and South references in this. It's pretty good. My case. So new props. This is what it's all about this time. Detective Sokka. Magnifying eyeglass. The bubble pipe is fantastic when we get to it. But yeah, Zuko continuing to steal here. And this is this interesting part of this journey here for Zuko, as he steals like so much. He doesn't just steal to survive here. This isn't this sort of Robin Hood style thing. He steals like mass amounts of money and these kind of fancy items, like he's trying to sort of still be the prince even though he's on the run, and it signals this sense of like him being utterly unable to accept the position that he's in and still holding on hope to that he can accomplish what he needs to do. So this is great here, the way the investigation goes, and the fact that no one seems to know that it was separated right now. It's just really fun. Struck down Chin the Great. And we built this statue of Chin. And so some of the stuff comes out here is pretty cool. Same stone. And yeah, I love the little joke here of just Katara always trying to come to the conclusion first and Sokka wanting to jump ahead of her to get it himself. Because he wants to do the full-on Sherlock Holmes, like, full explanation, whereas Katara just wants to say it as efficiently as possible. And yeah, where did he get the bubble pipe? The sort of dragon bubble pipe. Interesting animal there. And this is great. You think it's going to be, Aang having to deal with the harsh life as a prisoner. But they actually just have an appreciation for people who are bald and have tattoos. Not in a bad way. There's Oyaji. There's the statue of Kyoshi, kind of painted up again. Foamy Mouth Guy, wonderful, wonderful reference. Can we get a Foamy Mouth Guy Funko Pop? That would be fantastic. They've already done Cabbage Merchant. This is brilliant. So good. And he foamed up for no reason. Oh, look, it's Coco. Named after Kyoshi's daughter, who hopefully we'll maybe get some explanation for at the end of Shadow of Kyoshi. And yeah, he's pretty embarrassed that he did that for no reason. And he's like, no way, Kyoshi wouldn't do that. And then, like, we actually know stuff about Kyoshi, and most fans are kind of like, actually, Kyoshi probably would. Have you ever actually talked to her? Obviously, he hasn't, but, you know. And yeah, mention of Suki there, pretty nice. They inspired her. So that's interesting, referring to her, like, basically a full season on. Referencing her again, and we're going to see her in just a few episodes after this, but that makes sense. I like the sort of restraint here that they were willing to not just have this return to Kyoshi and have the reunion happen here, but instead her appearance to later on be, you know, a surprise. And I love this, that they are ultimately sort of more of an airbender weapon, but she has them because of her connection to her mother. And then, great fact there, that Kyoshi had the biggest feet of any avatar. And then, yeah, the shoes don't match the footprint. Do these things mean nothing to you? And I like how she sort of lets him go ahead with this because she knows that the boomerang means a lot to him. So she's like, okay, I'll accept some of this stupidity. And here we go. They're just the nicest guys ever. It's just really fun. He's talking about his crush on Katara here. You're a great catch. It's just really, really fun, clever writing. And then, you know, I love all these little things. Are just like, you know, they each have their evidence from either side, and only right at the end do you get the connection that these two places were linked. It's Kyoshi Day here, which obviously the death of Chin takes place on the day the Yokoya basically became Kyoshi Island. He just absolutely smashes Katara out of the way. And yeah, this is where they really haven't figured it out yet. Of like, they were on this island, but the island was part of this place before. And if Aang presents this correctly, you know, he could get out of it. Because they don't know the details. But here it is, the just us system. We don't care about your evidence. We'll just presents our side, and then the people of Chin will vote on who gets it. And they don't care about justice. They'll just vote for themselves, because they're that sort of a place. Everyone loved the Great because he was so great. Yeah, just... And yeah, no evidence whatsoever. It's just be loyal to Chin. That's it. But yeah, Aang not prepared at all for this. My feet were big in a past life, and your stone matches your statue. It's just, it's great. Just he has so little support here. They're all just like, what is going on here? I love this. Just the cut suddenly to do it to two of them, like, this has not gone well. And then you can see it, like, really fancy food, fancy, like, tea set, living in luxury while they're on the run. Like, and just Iroh pointing out that if it's good tea, it's all about how you make it, not what you drink it from. That Iroh, who's had much longer, I suppose, being part of the royal family, is more used to living in kind of humble surroundings like this than Zuko is. A simple honor in poverty. And yeah, this is an interesting moment of, like, Iroh kind of pointing out that, okay, even if we did, given what's happened with Azula, do you think it would fix everything? And this makes Zuko actually lose hope. But he tries to get across to Zuko, you can give yourself hope if you focus on something else. Focus on inner strength and so on. But his interpretation is more like, oh, I have to go off on my own in that case. Despite all the little moments that have happened up to now that should help him to realize, you know, a different perspective, he doubles down on, no, I'm a prince, I have to hold to this. And this is fun. Like, okay, we'll just dress her up and Aang up in all the Kyoshi outfit stuff and hope that this works. I was like, is this how the Avatar works? Can we channel Kyoshi through her? Stuff might work. And it ends up actually working, which is pretty fun. Like, this sort of Avatar kind of possession thing, like, they don't really establish that this is necessarily like a spiritual day in the same way that the Roku kind of possession happened back in 108. So I guess it is just because it's an important anniversary from a key moment in Kyoshi's life that it was able to happen. Probably because also the Avatar is in danger here as well. There's a degree of that. But what a cool moment. Great voice. I killed him straight away. And here's what happened. Horrible tyrant. And look how much he takes over. Look at the size of that army. Super serious stuff. And she only stops him when he comes after her home. Yokoya. So she kind of sat back and allowed him to do that. That's where the first footprint came from. A little bit too much of a joke there, I think, just that she blows his clothes off. But that she doesn't attack him directly. She's like, she doesn't do what she does here to directly stop him or counter his sort of invasion of the Earth Kingdom or taking it over. She just doesn't want him to take over her home. So she just separates herself from him. And him standing still is what gets him killed. He doesn't step back to protect himself. And that's what happens, and that's how it falls apart. It speaks to this idea of Kyoshi is relatively, like, fine with letting what happens. And it speaks to, like, the atmosphere in the Earth Kingdom at this point in time, that clearly it was kind of the will of the people that they were letting Chin take over, that Kyoshi didn't feel the need to take over. And she only wanted to make sure to protect her own place. And that fits in with, like, what happens afterwards, the peasant uprising in Ba Sing Se. That the people, even after the death of Chin and his conquest sort of falling apart, still are upset at the leadership of the Earth Kingdom. And Kyoshi is forced to come in there, create the Dai Li, and, you know, settle things down that way. But that the whole issue of the people of the Earth Kingdom with the leadership has been a case for so long. And a lot of it is informed by like the Dao Fei being so important like during Kyoshi's time. That sentiment of the Dao Fei and that being a huge part of the Earth Kingdom against the leadership allows what happens to happen. But yeah, Zuko kind of once again taking one of these step backs, and you think he makes progress in Zuko alone, but then at the end of that episode he takes another step back, and this is what's so great about Zuko's journey here in this book. It's like you think he learns these lessons. Iroh tells him something very important. He learns something important on his own, but then it's always, no, I have to come back to it. And that's the sort of greatness but also frustration of Book 2 Zuko. And it makes it all the more powerful in Book 3 when he makes the big decisions. I love the Wheel of Punishment here. The pieces of art here are fantastic. And I love that there's community service on it. And the delivery here is fantastic. It's boiled in oil. What a horrific punishment. But the Rough Rhinos attack, which serves a few purposes. This is community service. And there again, it's a little bit of a kind of like being jokey about Chin the Conqueror again, of just like they immediately take down the statue. It's not treated as being an important thing. I love Aang's kind of sass here of just like, you want to boil me in oil, why should I help you? Okay, community service. Defeat them. And I love that Aang continues to do it with like some of the gear here. He uses the fans. And it's actually very, very effective. Because it's so fitting for airbending. Now, ultimately, we find out that Kyoshi's mother, Jasa, used it because her airbending was weakened by being a bandit, basically. And this helped to sort of re-amplify it to the way it kind of used to be. But like Aang, as like a fully powered, master airbender here, like it's super powerful that he's able to like project his air with the fans. And yeah. It just highlights that, Skill Bender is better than most of the members of the Rough Rhinos. There's Vashir, who obviously we met more in the search. We found out about his sort of story, about how he went from being a Yuan archer to being part of the Rough Rhinos. And he gets his boomerang back. It always does come back. Except we haven't found out, like, if, we know he gets another boomerang going into the comics. They don't really focus on it much, but like, will Space Sword come back? That's the big thing for the comics. And this is cool here. Aang versus Colonel Monkey. And he just decides like, okay, It's a little bit like, those fans are actually quite important. That like headdress is very important. And Aang just kind of like dropped them there, and I don't think they like focus anything on it afterwards in terms of them getting them back or anything. But like, I suppose the idea is that they do actually give them back. They just don't focus on it, but I assume they do give them back. In that sense, like, that's an opportunity for a story, is like the whole group's return to Kyoshi Island after the events of this episode. And yeah, to celebrate the day the Avatar was not boiled in oil. I just how they immediately sort of changed their traditions in a way here. It's pretty funny. And yeah, it's just like, worst town ever. Kind of, the whole town's a bunch of weirdos, basically. But like I said, it's like a lot of the like earlier Book 2 episodes where there might be a maybe more side plotty type main plot, but there's always something interesting going on, whether it be world building or a notable point in Zuko's journey, and that's what we kind of get here. The seriousness of like him deciding to go off on his own and what kind of built up to that. The seriousness of the kind of Kyoshi actual backstory and us learning some of the context around this location. Plus the comedy of like Aang and the prisoners, Detective Sokka and like Katara having to play the foil to that, and so on. The village being just so weird and odd. Like I said, I think about the only weakness of this is that I think Chin should have been treated a little bit more seriously, considering what Kyoshi states he was and what he did. So I think they just tonally maybe got it a little wrong with the idea of like, oh, Kyoshi like blows all of his clothes off and, you know, he just stands there and falls over. I think you could have made that into more of a epic scene or something like that. That maybe it wasn't just that he sat there and like stood his ground, that he was actually trying to escape from the cliff collapsing, but like tragically couldn't quite make it, and that would add kind of more impact to it, and not just have it be like, yeah, he just stood there next to lava after like a cliff was separated, basically, that sort of thing. But still, huge Avatar State moment. Probably more impressive than simply her like cracking like the peninsula off, basically, to turn it into an island, is how she's able to just move the island back into the sea so effortlessly. But still super impressive stuff there. Seeing, you know, Kyoshi kind of in her prime just make a decision. But it's also thought-provoking, with the idea being that she knew who Chin was and what he was doing, but kind of stood back and let him accomplish what he did right up until he came to her place. And that's so interesting. That like he basically had the whole place conquered except for like Ba Sing Se and, you know, Yokoya. And he went for her first and he met his end. Because Kyoshi says even if it wasn't an accident, she probably would have ended up, you know, taking him out eventually, basically. If it came to it, to protect her home, she would have killed him, even if it was an accident that we saw take place here. And like I said, I think it links nicely into the peasant uprising of Ba Sing Se, in terms of just the context of like the people wanting new leadership, even if it was someone like Chin. At least he's actually, I suppose, leading them and making changes, even if he is more of a tyrannical ruler as opposed to the king who just stays back behind the walls and has like no effect, basically. At least this guy's doing something. And I'd love to know if they cover that at all in the Kyoshi novel. And that's the one thing with the second Kyoshi novel, is that there's going to be a little bit of pressure on it to see if they literally just cover teenage Kyoshi, or if they will fill in some gaps for us at the end about stuff that happens later in her life and context to other scenes and so on. But we'll have to wait and see on that. But yeah, very enjoyable episode. I always love rewatching this one. But in the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on this episode, Avatar Day. That's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.